finally, after what feels like the 52-year season, the Vikings are done officially. Not, hot take, done, not eliminated without actually being eliminated. They're dead. The season's over. They will not play another football game until the preseason in August, which is bittersweet. It sucks because I love football and I love watching the Vikings. It is sweet because, golly, this team has been difficult to watch for the last month plus. We're not going to talk a ton about the Detroit game, but I'm Jordan Hawthorne. I'm joined, as always, by the marvelous and wonderful Will Goodwin. William, I don't know, man. We're not talking about Detroit. I want to give you the opportunity to say your piece. It was the final game of the season, so if you have any takes, I guess briefly we can throw them in at the beginning, but then we're going to do more of a bigger picture show.
Not much to recount about that game, other than it sort of just illustrated what this season became for the Vikings. The defense, regressed down the stretch, sort of showing the lack of talent that they possessed, and then when you have the injuries in the secondary that they had, there was the chance of slowing down the Detroit attack offensively was pretty slim. And the youth and inexperience and just kind of in general lack of talent on the defensive side. I'd also just note, defensively, Harrison Smith very well may have played his last game as a Viking. He showed his age a little bit down the stretch. I don't know if I've ever said that about him. But the last maybe 2-3 games, he looked a little slow. He looked a little old. And, that kind of idea of the Vikings they lost a step defensively, and I think Brian Flores got about every drop out of them that he could. I mean, what did we say, Jordan? We wanted this defense to be middle of the pack, right? That's what they were. They were like 16th and everything.
The problem is, I feel like when we said middle of the pack, we meant like, hey, defense, give up like 22 points a game, and the offense will backpack you. And it feels like they were either the best defense in the league or the worst defense in the league. And I think that transitions nicely into this. What went wrong this season? How did we, we lost 6 more games than we did last year, and was it all just Cousins got hurt? If Cousins is healthy, are we talking about this team in a different light? Kind of these bigger picture discussions, and of course we have the power of hindsight on our side. My daughter's very excited about this conversation, but yeah, man, I think the defense needs to be more consistent in being middle of the pack, because that was really what was so frustrating about the last month or so of this season was, the defense couldn't. They had the Raiders game, and that was their that was it. They were cooked after that. The Bengals hung 20. How much did the Bengals hang on us? 30?
7.
Was it 27? So yeah, 27, and then Detroit 30, and then Green Bay 33 or something, and then Detroit like 30 again. Just not good down the stretch when we needed the defense to be good because the offense didn't have Jefferson at points. It didn't have, obviously Cousins, and Hawkinson went out the last 2 games. I don't know, man. Is it fair to say we can chalk this season up to injuries and make no judgments about O'Connell as a coach or Kwesi as a GM, really anybody outside of like the backups who stepped up and played however they played?
I think, there's a little bit of that's true. I think that would be a little bit too kind, and maybe a little too merciful. Because although the coaching staff was put behind the 8 ball for a lot of the season, you have to put a lot of that on the coaching staff, the turnovers. Say what you want about how much fault you should give a coach versus a player for a turnover, but ultimately everything starts and stops with the head coach. And I think Kevin O'Connell would take responsibility for those turnovers. I think there's that. I think there's also some late game management that O'Connell needs to work on. I won't say he cost the Vikings games, but he definitely opened doors that the Vikings, maybe should have had wrapped up. A lot of that's hindsight 2020. A lot of that's dealing with backup quarterbacks. And do we look at the late game management differently if TJ Hawkinson doesn't drop the ball against the Chargers? Do we look at the late game management differently if Alex Madison doesn't fumble in Denver? There's a lot of things that...
On the flip side of that, let me just very quickly, do we
Yeah.
really look, because I mean, it's already, everyone is kind of talking, like Kevin O'Connell did a bad job this season, late game management. The game that he got away with it in was the San Francisco game where he had Cousins. And I said a couple weeks ago on the show, maybe the late game play calls are different if you've got Cousins in the lineup. But I don't know that they would be, because he did the same thing against San Francisco. He run, bullcrap pass, don't turn the ball over. And then he gave the ball back to, San Francisco with like a minute and a half to go and a chance to go win. And luckily for us, Brock Purdy, I'm pretty sure, had a concussion, and he threw an interception. So we lucked out, though. But, I mean, if that's just another one. Now we're talking about being a 6-win team. We're also picking like 7th or 6th, which, I know 11th and 6th, you can get good players wherever. Ivan Pace didn't even get drafted. But, I just think that that's something to talk about, and I love that you brought that up, and I wanted to correct myself from a few weeks ago where I said, what would be different if Kirk was there? I don't think it would have been. I think we make the same mistakes.
Yeah. I think it's very clearly something that he needs to improve on, and it's not as simple as just be more aggressive. I think a lot of fans watch game management at the end, and if the coach doesn't do what they want them to do, they think it's bad.
Yeah.
Or if the coach doesn't do what works, if what they choose to do fails, they think it's bad. And it's obviously not that simple, but I think the recurring theme of the inability to close out games, you have to look back on that as a coach. The Chicago game was one where I don't know if you can blame the coach on that one, because you had a quarterback who threw the ball to the other team 4 times. And it's a conundrum where there's really no win situation. So there's things that he needs to work on. There's things that the team was put behind the 8 ball where they were sort of, it was a situation, like an unwinnable situation, but there's clearly things they can work on. You talked about Kwesi. I want to hear your thoughts, because I think, in a season filled with injuries and just turnovers and all that, like, you almost could give someone like the GM, who has almost no hand in, the injuries and stuff and turnovers. Like, it's not his fault that his best players are dropping the ball everywhere.
Right.
But where do you put sort of like Kwesi Adolfo-Mensa's season and things that he might need to improve on?
I think it is tough for me to say. I'm glad you asked me this. I really am, because I have thoughts on Kwesi. I always have thoughts on Kwesi. And I laid out the blueprint at the beginning of the season for if things didn't go to plan, everyone was going to be pointing out Kwesi's misses. So I'm going to be I'm going to be the devil's advocate, and I'm going to say Kwesi Adolfo-Mensa drafted Jordan Addison, who I think was the second best rookie wide receiver. Puka Nacua obviously kind of ran away with that, but I think he got the second best wide receiver and a huge part of our offense. I think Kwesi, you can't really deny what Hawkinson was doing for this offense. Kwesi's the guy who brought in Hawkinson, which is a ballsy move because you traded within the division to get TJ Hawkinson. He extended Hawkinson. Really, I just wish that we had better corners. But honestly, when we had Byron Murphy Jr., I wouldn't say the defense was a complete train wreck, or the secondary was a complete train wreck. So I'm not ready to, get rid of Kwesi right now today. I think that Kwesi needs another year. I think he has a plan in place. If you listen, I want to talk about, I don't know, have you listened to Kevin and Kwesi's post? Yeah, so they had the press conference today. It's Wednesday when we're recording this, so I want to talk more about that kind of later as we get into the off-season wish lists and what we think the future looks like. But overall, I think if I had to grade Kwesi, which I know you didn't ask me to, but I love doing stuff like this. I love giving people grades and saying F.
Professor Hawthorne.
Yes, I love it. I would stamp a solid B-. I was going to say C+, but that sounds a little too... B-. You got a wide receiver who I think is going to be a staple of your offense. The tight end that you traded for last year took big cojones to trade for and was the best tight end in football this season. I'm just going to say he was better than Kelsey this year. Kelsey was not that transcendentally good. So I think, Kwesi's doing a solid job. I'm going to be very interested to see what he does this offseason to attack the weaknesses that this team very clearly has. I'm going to flip it back on you. Are you disappointed in me? Should I be holding Kwesi's feet to the fire a little bit more for not drafting, an Xavier Rhodes, a Antoine Winfield Sr., not getting that staple piece of the secondary when it's obviously such a weakness, and we knew it was a weakness going into the season, and it continued that way.
Yep. The other person you forgot to mention was Ivan Pace. Obviously not a draft pick,
thank you.
But
Kwesi signed him.
Who cares that he wasn't drafted?
Agreed.
He was brought in with all the other rookies, and doesn't matter. He's making no money either. That was a steal, Ivan Pace is making pennies compared to what everybody else is because of the undraftedness. So that was a huge get by the Vikings. The cornerbacks, they're obviously a big need. I think Mekhi Blackman had a lot of flashes this year. A concern that I had from him, from the start of training camp, was his shoulder. He was wearing one of those shoulder slings that Dalvin Cook became, known for because of all the shoulder injuries Dalvin had. And, from the start of training camp, he had one of those things on, and I was immediately remarking at that how concerning that was, that he hasn't taken a hit in months and he's already wearing a shoulder sling. It came back to bite him down the stretch. He missed some time because of that shoulder. This might be a little bit controversial. This might be a little bit soft on my part, but let me get this out first. The Vikings cornerbacks and the players that Kwesi has drafted, apart from Mekhi Blackman, really haven't panned out as of now. Andrew Booth showed flashes. Caleb Evans showed flashes this year. But by and large, the group as a whole, kind of meh.
Yeah.
And then obviously you throw Lewis Seen in there. I mean, he hasn't seen the field. Big injury, of course, that happened last season that Kwesi talked about today. But to me, that sounds a little bit more like an excuse. It's second year for a first-round pick, and he hardly saw the field. And again, a loaded safety room, right? But when you got Theo Jackson and Jay Ward seeing time over you, that's something maybe to be concerned about.
Agreed.
Jay Ward, another name that had some ups and downs, had some special teams gaffes, but also saw some snaps on defense. And so anyways, long preamble of me saying, sure that the jury is not back yet. The jury is still out on this Vikings core of cornerbacks that have been drafted by Kwesi, because I find it terribly punitive to look at a defense that was completely trashed last year, large in part due to the fit and the scheme and the coaching style, and everything that Ed Donatel brought just didn't fit what the Vikings had.
Right.
And then you have to completely trash that, throw that out, and then you bring in a guy who has a completely different style. And these new guys, these young guys who've been in the NFL for 2.5 minutes now have to learn that. And although you'd like to maybe see some more progress, I think there's reason to believe that, especially if Flores is back next year, we could see improvement from these guys. That said, when we get to wish list stuff, I'm still going to talk about drafting more corners.
Yeah, I think I agree with you, and I almost like the approach that Kwesi did, because he's had 2 seasons. It's not like this has been, the offensive line was continuously a problem with Rick Spielman. He could not get a good offensive line grouped together, and he was here for a long time. And so Kwesi's been here for 2 years. He got he got a bad defense, and he's trying to get it back put together.
Yep.
I want to say one last thing about the defensive backfield and things of that. So just while we're on this topic, and then I do have something to say. We have some Cousins news that everyone already knows. He hasn't extended or anything. It's just his press conference. But I'm gonna say this: Harrison Smith, you have been a tremendous Viking, but for some reason I don't have the same nostalgic love for you that I had with like Adam Thielen and Kyle Rudolph and Eric Kendricks and some of these other guys. I don't know if it's because he was drafted right before I got like deep into following the Vikings. And so I think that's part of it. Like he was kind of like the old regime type of guy. And he's been a tremendous Viking. I love Harry. He's a Ring of Honor, no doubt. I think he's a Hall of Fame contender. I don't know if he makes it. I mean, Jared Allen doesn't seem like. I mean, come on, guys, put Jared Allen in the Hall of Fame, damn it. But like, it's time for Harrison Smith to walk off, and I would love for him to retire. But if he thinks he can still go, I would love for him to go somewhere and prove that he can still go. Go to like Pittsburgh, or go somewhere in the AFC where we won't have to play you, and go ball out and maybe get yourself a Super Bowl ring. But I don't want him on the Vikings next season, and we might maybe talk about that more with the wish list. I have some thoughts. Go ahead. Do you have something to add?
No, I was just gonna say, and we can put more of a bow on Harrison Smith later if that becomes a finality, kind of like we did with Thielen. I think it was important last year. We did sort of half of an episode telling thank you to Adam Thielen, and we'll do something similar. I mean, Harrison Smith's been around forever. He was on the team when they were wearing those terrible early 2000s jerseys with like the bubble letters and the stripes down the side and the swirl at the kneecap and all that trash. Yeah. He was around when those jerseys were still here, so he's been around for a long time.
He's seen 3 different coaching regimes, right? He saw Frazier, he saw Zimmer, and now he's seen O'Connell. He wasn't Childress, was he?
Childress was gone, right?
I'm like 99% sure Childress was gone.
Yeah.
But who knows? We'll look into that. Like you said, we'll do a whole, farewell episode for Harrison Smith, and he deserves that. I bring up that I'm not nostalgic for him. I recognize how important he has been to this team and this community and everything like that. Kirk Cousins did a end of season, end of year, whatever you want to call it, press conference, and he talked about his Achilles. He talked about a few different things in that press conference, but obviously he was peppered with questions about his contract, what he's looking for, how much the money plays into it. The big takeaway that I said before the show, as we were just chit-chatting about what we were going to talk about, I said I was going to get this carved into a sign, hang it next to the Live, Laugh, Love signs that I have up in my living room. He said, it's not about the dollars, it's what they represent, which I don't speak fluent Kirk Cousins, but I dabble, kinda, and I'm pretty sure that means he wants at least a 2-year contract, and he wants fully guaranteed money on both sides. He doesn't care how much it's for. He just wants a commitment from the Vikings that he's the quarterback in 2024 and 2025, minimum. I'm sure he would rather get a 3-year deal so he can ride off into the sunset as a Viking, as a 39-year-old, 40-year-old quarterback. This is my take on it. Yep. Pretty quick one. Bull crap. 100% bull crap. If I was Kwesi Adofo-Mensah, the second he said that, I call Ian Rappaport and I say, you didn't hear this from Kwesi. You heard this from a disgruntled scout. Or you just heard from a source. We offered Kirk Cousins 2 years, $52 million, fully guaranteed, 26 per. He said no. He didn't sign the deal. So clearly it is about the money. Kirk Cousins wants a 2-year, $80 million contract. You can't talk me out of that. I want your thoughts. I wouldn't pay him it. I wouldn't give him 2 years, $80 million. That's too much money. And you have positioned yourself in a year where you were trying to win this whole competitive rebuild thing that I hate so much and everyone hates so much, I feel like. It's working. We tried to win and we just got banged up and had a bad season. So now we're in striking distance to go into the future and trade up and get Jaden Daniels and win a bunch of Super Bowls. I wouldn't give him the 40 million. I want your take. Do you think he's being genuine? Do you think this is a PR stunt? What's your take on it's not the dollars, it's what they represent?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, you can read it a couple different ways. You could read it, how you said of, fully guaranteed money, 2 years, commitment, etc. But you could also read it in a very cynical light and say, like, well, the guys who get paid the most are clearly valued the most. And so, you could read it cynically and see it as that, as just Kirk in a nicer way saying, yeah, you need to pay me still.
To not to cut you off, but that is how I took it at first. I was like, oh, he's saying he wants to be treated like the top 7 quarterback he is, so he wants to make... And that's how I took it at first, but upon seeing other opinions from so many people, I changed how I viewed it, but I love that you're bringing that up. I have to just point that out.
Yeah. And we will have plenty of time over the next, 3.5 months to debate whether or not the Vikings should sign Cousins and use their higher draft picks to beef up the defensive line, or go get more cornerbacks, or trade for X, Y, or Z player, and how they should build their team. We got plenty of time to debate that, so I'm not even going to get into that now. But the other thing that I think we need to take into context here of this whole Cousins and contract conversation he had, I mean, he talked for 12 minutes. It was basically all about this. So the other quote that I think was important to take note of was when he was asked if he would be willing to take a hometown discount. And obviously in this case, hometown meaning the Vikings, even though he's not from here. And I'm just going to read his quote because I think it's very important that we get it correct. He said, "That's a great question and one I've thought about pretty much my whole 12 years," which full stop, I don't think that's true, because there has been no point in his career where he's taken a hometown discount. So cut that part out. I don't believe you on that part, Kirk. Anyway, carrying on. The next part of the quote is, "I do think it's important to be aware of. I think that God has blessed me financially beyond my wildest dreams. So at this stage in my career, the dollars are really not what it's about." So when I take that part of the quote, and this part came before the part that we talked about prior of the what they represent part. You take that part of the quote where he's talking about being blessed financially beyond his wildest dreams. I took that part to heart, because I think Kirk Cousins is now getting to a point in his career where I think he understands he's now been paid handsomely for the last couple of contracts. He got the 2 franchise tags, which, although they were a slap in the face, they do pay you well when you're on the franchise tag for that,
Yes.
1, or in his case, 2 years. And so that, what has it been now? 8 years with the Vikings, 6 years, 2 with Washington. Those 8 years combined, he's been paid very well. And I think he's beginning in a new way to understand and appreciate that, and understanding his, mortality as an NFL player. He talked about there at some point too, like the most important thing to him is winning. I don't think that was, published in all the articles and stuff, but he talked about winning being the most important thing with where he goes. And so if that is true, that coupled with his idea and his comments about being financially blessed beyond his wildest dreams, you put those 2 things together, I think he can win in Minnesota.
Yep.
If they help the defense. And by helping the defense, or a way to help the defense is to take less money. So I think we will see a lot of how honest Kirk Cousins was being here in the next couple of months. If reports come out that he turns down a 2-year, $70 million contract because he wanted more guaranteed money, then I think we'll be pretty, okay, Kirk was just, lying through his teeth, basically.
Right.
So it's hard to say, looking at his past contract negotiations, where he has always kind of gone for the most money he can get, and in some ways, rightfully so. It's hard to look at that history, though, and to look to the future and think that he's going to change his patterns of negotiating, if you know what I mean. So I'm a little skeptical. I would like for it to be true. I think Cousins back on this team, plus some cap space to fix the defense. I think you can have a very competitive team, and we talked about it, and we thought this team could compete for a Super Bowl this year without all the injuries. So, that's kind of my thoughts. Any other thoughts from you on that segment about the wildest dreams stuff?
I'm going to point out that Kirk is very calculate. I want to say, I'm going to be hateful for a second, and I'm not trying to be like a Cousins hater or whatever you want to call me, but like it feels like he knows exactly what the fans want to hear at every moment, you know? Like it seems like every year in training camp, he throws a pick and he lets out like a big F-bomb. And everyone talks about it, and they're like, he's finally playing with some fire, and he's being passionate, and this is the year. And he always talks about like, yeah, I'm actually kind of faster than a lot of people think, so I need to run more in my game. And every year, I'm the idiot that bites on that quote, and I say, oh my gosh, this is it. Cousins is going to extend more plays, and he's going to play better off script. He never does. He plays the same. So like, I think this is, I'm being very cynical. I think this is another example of Cousins saying something that makes the fan base think if the Vikings don't, because Kwesi's going to be mature in this negotiation, right? The team, the Vikings, respected franchise, they don't really leak, you know, they're not going to muddy the waters in this negotiation. So they're not going to announce that they've offered Kirk 2 years, $70 million. You know, if he signs, then they'll announce it when he signs the contract. But, you know, I think Cousins is saying what the fans want to hear, that he's open to taking a hometown discount. And it's not the dollars, it's what they represent. But ultimately, I look at what happened in the 2017 offseason when he signed with Minnesota. And he did tone down more money to come to Minnesota. He had like 3 years, $92 million, I think it was, from the Jets on the table. And he was looking like he was going to go there, and then at the last minute, he backed out and came to the Vikings for like $84 million or whatever it was. So he did leave like $8 million, which was that's like $2.5 million a season, roughly. He did leave money on the table so he could come to a winning culture and a team where he thought he could compete. But he still became the highest paid, you know, guy. Like he's still looking to get his name up there. So I don't know. I would love to see him come back. I'm not one of these people that, by the way, expects him to come back and play on the vet minimum or play for $20 million. You're going to have to pay the guy top 10 money. But I think it's going to be interesting to see whether or not, I would love for the Vikings to get nasty and say, this is what the offer is. I mean, it's 2 years, this much. My personal opinion, I don't think the Vikings want him for 2 seasons. I think the Vikings want to draft their quarterback, have him for 1 more season to stout so they can be competitive and no one's job is at risk. And then they can put, you know, Jaden Daniels, Bo Nix, whoever the guy of the future is, they can throw them in 25, onward and upward, you know, all that kind of stuff. That's my 2 cents.
Yeah. Let me just say one quick thing, because we're gonna slide into the wish list things. And in the spirit of wish listing, you just mentioned, you know, he's not going to take the vet minimum. Of course, he's not taking the vet minimum. It's like $2 million or whatever.
Right.
But no, I say that because that's like the joke, right? Everyone's like, hey, Kirk, just take the vet minimum, man. You said that you've been financially blessed by your wildest dreams. Who cares? Let me just read off the last years of Tom Brady's earnings and give you a little bit of a hope and a wish list item here for if Kirk Cousins were to sign for a very cheap contract. So the end of Tom Brady's career, 2019, New England Patriots, he played for $23 million. Granted, inflation, contracts go up every year, et cetera, et cetera. But Daniel Jones is making 40 right now. And Tom Brady was making 23 in his last year in New England. With the Patriots, with the Buccaneers, each of the first 2 years, $25 million. So about the same, a little bit up. Basically the same if you talk about, you know, contracts going up every year. His last year in Tampa Bay, $15 million. So if we want to dream, if we want to have a wish list out, my wish list is Kirk Cousins comes back and signs for $20 million. That would be amazing. Not going to happen.
Nope.
I'm not delusional here, but that would be awesome.
He doesn't live that expensive of a life. That Like, Coke, you are fine, dude. Like, and I hate saying this because if the roles were reversed and I was the person who was like, yeah, I could maybe I could compete for Super Bowls if I took 20 million, but I could go to Atlanta and maybe miss the playoffs and make like 90 million. Like, like, I mean, those are two very different numbers. I mean, we're talking about a gap of like 50 million. Like, I get why he wants to make his money. I respect him. I love Coke. I bought his jersey. I mean, I love the guy. He's entertaining.
Held a funeral for him this year.
I did. I played Amazing Grace, How Sweet the Sound on the bagpipes. I mean, I didn't play it, but I played it through my phone. And yeah, man, I love that man. But I just don't know that a 36-year-old quarterback coming off his Achilles, you should be paying him the same way that the Giants paid Daniel Jones, who, granted, hindsight 2020, that looks like a terrible contract. He just went to and won a playoff game for them and looked decent enough doing it. I obviously, hindsight, look, Cousins could go to Atlanta and win them a Super Bowl, and all of us will be sitting here with Bo Nix, who ends up being a draft bust, and we could say, well, shucks, that's just same old Vikings, whatever. But ultimately, I do think that you have to take some pretty big risks to do this, and let's get into some off-season wish lists and then get out of here. I'm gonna point out, I took these notes. I'm not gonna spoil these entire notes because there's a point where I'm gonna do an entire segment. I don't know if you're gonna this might be a video I have to do by myself. Well, I say, how do the Vikings fix where they're at right now? How do we go from 7-10 to dominating the NFL? And I have a bunch of notes here. Not going to spoil too much of it. I'm just going to say this. The last time the Vikings were not so good and were entering into a rebuild, they did not have a quarterback contract on the books. It was the Christian Ponder days. And they went and they signed two guys who are some of my favorite all-time Vikings of any era, but especially of my adult life. They signed Linval Joseph to a massive 5-year contract, and they signed Tom Johnson, the most underrated Viking in modern history. They signed both of those defensive linemen, interior defensive linemen. It's time to do that again. I really think that the whole having to blitz on every play, having to bring 5 guys, having to load the box, pun intended, in order to not get ran on like you did against Philadelphia, you've got to get some beef in the middle. Yep. And I think it starts with, we said we weren't going to do names. I have to throw one name out there. Is it Christian Wilkins? Is that the Dolphin who's a free agent after this year? Christian Wilkins, he's 26. Go sign him to a 5-year massive contract. You can fiddle with the money and move it wherever you want it. Go get yourself some beef in the middle of this defensive line, and you're probably going to need an edge rusher next to Danielle Hunter. But I'm ready to get back to the days. I know we have an offensive head coach, and we're kind of more of the 98 Vikings than we are the 17 Vikings, but I need me some big, nasty defensive linemen that are going to bully offensive lines across the league and dominate whenever we go play in Philadelphia or whenever we have to go, take on San Francisco or something like that. So I want me some meat in the middle of the defense. I know you've teased what you were going to say. I'll let you get into it now.
Yeah, I mean, that to me is so important. The middle of the defense. I think I can't remember what the percentage was, but the Vikings were dead last from defensive tackle pressures or something like that. Like, just brutal. And in an age where defensive tackles are rushing the passer at, not the same, but, a rising rate, rivaling edge defenders. I mean, not that you have to have Chris Jones or Aaron Donald or Kenny Clark even, but if you're going to have a dominant defense, that is ultra important. And I love me some Harrison Phillips, but he's not that guy. And losing Dalvin Tomlinson, although you could debate whether or not they should have let him go, but he was sort of like the only player that rivaled any of that from the Vikings. And even when he was here, he was hurt a lot and he didn't reach that peak. And so, to your point, defensive tackle has to be important. If you're not taking a quarterback in the first round, let's just, for the sake of argument, go get a huge nose tackle from Georgia or something.
Yeah. Well, and
basically the Eagles have proven that whatever defensive tackle you get from Georgia works. So go get him.
And I think you have to be open if you Brian Flores going into this offseason. This defense was built to be a 4-3 defense. And I know he was like, oh, this defense doesn't have a name. It's not, we don't play in those roles. Yes, you do. You're a 3-4 defense. And I know you do a lot of variance and, where you have different guys. But, like, at the end of the day, you're a 3-4 defense. You're rushing pass rushers that are linebackers that are standing up like Danielle Hunter and stuff. You have to be open to saying, okay, we're going to get 2 big defensive tackles. The second best one is going to be Harrison Phillips. And then we're going to have hand in the dirt defensive linemen on the edge like Danielle Hunter. And then we'll go draft another one. You have to be open to reverting back to a defensive style that the team was built to do. Because I don't think the Vikings are magic. It was foolish of us to think we could just make that switch overnight. Over the course of one offseason without the defense looking pretty bad. And so I don't know. That's just a thought. I doubt they do it.
Yep.
But like you said, go get a giant 6'5", 350-pound nose tackle that can just eat 2 linemen a play and potentially make big tackles for loss and, stop guys from getting first downs on 3rd and 1s. Like, let's get angry in the middle. I love it.
Yeah, it's becoming very important in today's NFL, which almost in some ways seems a little bit counterintuitive with how much of a passing attack this league has turned into. But when you see how much better defenses are when they have a game-wrecking defensive tackle, it's very clear that the Vikings need to move in that direction. The other one, the obvious one, cornerbacks, needs to be addressed. Whether that's Byron Murphy again, he has 1 year left on his contract, but keeping him or getting more, I think there needs to be a more there, whether it's draft or free agency or trades. And those to me are the big ones defensively. I mean, you got a deep safety room, and I'll just list maybe a couple more. You can either agree, disagree, whatever. Probably kicker.
Yeah.
Keeping Brian Flores, I think, needs to be on there. Now, we talked about how the defense, was terrible, amazing, terrible. Let's give Brian Flores a little more of a hand in the players he selects and get him involved. He was a scout adjacent to begin with.
Yep.
Let's give him a hand in the draft process. Let him sort of handcraft his defense how he wants it to look. Get some defensive backs that play the way he wants them to play. But I also just think bringing him back for another year is huge.
Yeah.
On the offensive side, there's not a ton. The running game needs to improve, and how does that need to improve? You probably need to go get another interior offensive lineman.
Yeah. And bring back, I think you have to bring back Reisner. Because Reisner's, he's not here right now. I mean, right now he's a free agent. I think you have to bring Reisner back, and I know that doesn't help the running game, but I think he is a good enough pass protector that you can deal with the lack of running game. Then you have to go get another right guard who's big and nasty and mean. And, free agency or the draft, it doesn't really matter where you get him.
Yeah. And, I think we do need to acknowledge that as much as we lamented the offensive line in the offseason, really the only change was Reisner for Cleveland, and for all intents and purposes, they were all right.
Yeah.
They outperformed themselves when it came to pass pro, and I think the running game was a combination of things, but definitely not as bad, I think, as we thought they were going to be. And so, with a finite amount of resources, I don't think it's the thing that you focus on the most in the offseason.
Yeah, I think you need, and this is like, oh, God, I'm so excited to talk about the draft. I get this way every year where I'm just chomping at the bit. I've done like 19 mock drafts, and it's so fun. But I think we need another running back. I like Ty Chandler as, one of your running backs, but I think you need a guy I just don't think Madison's it, and I think you need a guy who can be a little bit more of a boozo. It would be beautiful to have like the LeGarrette Blount type that's just big and mean, and I mean, heck, even like Matt Asiata, who can he's a dependable 5 yards or 4 yards, like just go find another committee running back that you can have. You got to find somebody that's kind of big. Frank Gore Jr. is in this draft, but he's so little, and I want him. I don't care that he's not what I just laid out as the prototype. I want him just because he's Frank Gore's kid. Jerry Rice's son is in this draft. What? Yeah, talk about an all-time legacy draft. You could get the son of Jerry Rice and the son of Frank Gore. I'm just saying, that's pretty cool to me. Personally.
Another legend son, not in the draft yet, but just transferred to the University of Minnesota. Chris Driver, Donald Driver's son. Wide receiver, played for Penn State last season, didn't play a ton. Really curious to see what he can do. I'd love for the Driver legacy to live on this side of the border.
That would be very funny. But yeah, I love that. This draft, Marvin Harrison's kid is in it, Jerry Rice's kid is in it, Frank Gore's kid is in it. I love that. I love seeing guys that I knew and played with on Maddens, and now their kids are playing. It makes me feel really old, but
we're somehow getting old, and we're not that old.
yeah. Look, buddy, I'm not trying to be any sort of way, but you've got me beat by a few years. You're a little bit longer in the tooth, but I'm joining you quickly. In my age rate. It didn't help that Frank Gore played until he was 72. Okay, I think his grandkid is draft eligible in 2 years. Frank Gore played forever, but this will be my last wish list thing, and this is more of a fan base thing than it is a front office thing. But the front office also has to be on board with it. Getting back into this mystery list that I'm looking at of things that I'll talk about it, in an episode to a full extent, but if you look at what happened in the 2014 offseason, which was the first offseason with Mike Zimmer, let me find the note. Jared Allen left the team. Kevin Williams left the team. LaTroy Guion, who I don't know if you remember, but I think he was a guard. He left the team. Aaron Henderson, who was a solid linebacker for a while, he left the team. The year before that was Halvin and Winfield. They it is time to get this whole, we're going to pay you based on being a Ring of Honor future member out of the way. And that's where I said we were going to bring back up Harrison Smith. Harrison Smith going to have to go. Jordan Hicks, potentially. I know I said it last year, and he ended up playing well this year, but Jordan Hicks potentially has to go. Maybe Danielle Hunter has to go. there's a chance that some long-term Vikings that still have a little bit of gas in the tank are going to be let go. And as a front office, you have to be willing to make those tough decisions. And as a fan base, you have to be willing to accept those decisions because we've seen it before. Kevin Williams was probably, I guess Linval was pretty good, but Kevin Williams was so good as a defensive tackle. He was franchise cornerstone D tackle, and to let him walk, that took some stones for that front office and for that team, and they ended up better for it. Had 2 playoff appearances and a pretty solid team for a few years there. So that's my last thing. I don't really have final thoughts. My final thoughts are go Rams, humble the Lions. I have never seen a fan base go from so lovable and so oh yeah, it's the Lions. It was a friendly rivalry. Just the most toxic ass fans I've seen in a minute now that they have won and they swept us. And you would think that they have won the division every year for 50 years. I need them to be humbled bad. And if Matt Stafford was the one to do it, it would just chef's kiss, cherry on top. So go Rams. Big time go Rams. Those will be my final thoughts. I'll pass it off to you to end the show really quickly. Follow the show wherever you get your podcasts. Obviously, if you're watching on YouTube, hit the subscribe button. Follow this guy. He's over here. Follow him at Will Badloos. He's a really good writer. He's got good takes on Twitter. You're just missing out if you're not following him. And you can also follow at LTB Vikings, which is the show's Twitter, where you can see me be an idiot and post dumb stuff that it's pretty irrelevant. But other than that, this is a fun show. And
I really should have a disclaimer on my Twitter profile or my X profile saying the views and opinions expressed by the LTB Vikings Twitter page, or I am not associated with the views and opinions expressed by the LTB Vikings
I think
page.
I need to put that as a disclaimer, and that needs to be like an auto at the end of every tweet, just like Will Goodwin did not write this. This was 100% Jelton Hawthorne. He wrote all of this nonsense you're reading. And again, remember, I do get amnesty. 24 hours after the game, I can say whatever I want with no repercussions.
Yes, of course.
So just remember that. But yeah, guys, I mean, thank you so much for tuning in. We're going to have a great offseason. We really are. I feel like we have good off seasons all the time. I do mock drafts. We talk about mock drafts other people have done. We're going to talk about a bunch of stuff, as well as, if the Lions get humbled, maybe we do an entire show about, how crappy Detroit's been the last entirety of their franchise. Maybe we do something like that.
That might be a good idea for next week. Maybe we do a full game recap of Rams Lions, especially if it goes in the way that we hope.
And the whole time we just laugh. Like there's no analysis. The whole show is just us just oh man. But yeah, it could be fun.
The last thing I'll say on that note, I was funny that you brought up Stafford and the Lions and the Rams, because the Lions, I don't know who had the idea originally, who's propagating this, if it was the actual team or if it was, media outlets in Detroit, but they are banning, let's put some very strong air quotes around banning, because there's no way you can actually enforce this. They are banning Matthew Stafford Lions jerseys at Ford Field on Sunday night. It's kind of awesome. Like I honestly kind of love it, just like from a complete gamesmanship perspective of like, we love you, Matt, but not today. I in some ways I kind of love that, but it's also just hilarious. And I hope that it gives a little our old friend Matthew some added juice to go back home. Not that he'd need much of it at this point, but to stick it to his former franchise that couldn't do anything for him to give him any sort of help, and dare I say, get him his second Super Bowl. That would be crazy. Anyway, that's enough of us babbling. We will be back next week, maybe breaking down a Rams-Lions game. Maybe we will be talking more about the purple football team that is no longer playing.
Yep.
This was Load the Box. We'll talk to you next week. Skol, y'all.